soldiers and also part of SS minor. So these were the.
They were allowed in the city, or probably they were stationed here, or I don't understand. Illegally stationed here?
Some of them illegally, some legally, like Danzig police, because you have to remember that Danzig was Freistaat Danzig. Theoretically, it was a neutral enclave, free city of Danzig. Practically, especially starting from 1933, it was heavily controlled by the Nazis. That is why it was possible to find people who would shoot at Poles here, because as I mentioned, Poles were minorities, about 10 to 12%. So they identified more with the city of Danzig, some of them with Germany, none did it with Poland.
Did the Germans still refer to this as Danzig sometimes? I noticed at the airport.
Yes, I will come back to the question in a second and just turn around and see the film just before the outbreak of World War II.
That's the front door to walk in?
Yes, that's the front door, but in the past it was it had a fence. Yes, and now there's no fence.
Right.
And this is the front of the building we walked. It was rebuilt after the defense and then was again destroyed during the fights with the Soviets in 1945.
And the Germans had a film crew apparently filming all this.
Because that served their propaganda. And this is a very symbolic moment of German army entering Poland and destroying our symbol, which is a Polish eagle.
Where is this?
This is on the border between, could be practically everywhere. That was on the border between Poland and Germany. And this is a part of their propaganda, so they are showing the moment of invasion.
Well, the Russians were attacking on the other side.
Yes.
September 17th.
17 days later, on the 17th of September. And you can see Danzig in 1945. Some of you asked how much the city was destroyed, and here is the answer. And this is by the Motłava River. This is the area we walked yesterday.
This was from the bombing afterwards, or during the attack by the Germans?
That was, well, part of it was the result of the bombing, and part of it the result of the fighting between the Germans and the Soviet soldiers, the Red Army, because Gdansk was got the status of a kind of fortress, festoon, the Germans would call it, which means that the city was supposed to be defended to kind of the last soldier. But to be historically objective, I have to say that already when the Germans were forced out of the city and the Red Army soldiers were here, still some buildings were on fire because they did not care about the city, which was regarded as a German as a former German city. So even 1 month after the city had been set free, there were like buildings on fire. And coming back to your question about Gdansk being called Danzig, this is actually a German equivalent of the name, and we can't influence it. It's just like the way they call Rome, Rome, and they call Warsaw, Warsaw. So this is their language. And we, in the past, especially after World War II, like in the 1950s, 60s, I would say even up to the 1970s, we are pretty sensitive about Gdansk being called Danzig. But I think now, with quite a long time past, we understand that this is their language, and we accept them calling Danzig because we do the same, for example, with Rome. We don't call Rome Roma, which is the Italian word, we call it Rzym, which is the Polish word, and completely different. But we really appreciate our foreigners, like from other countries, when they call Gdansk and not Danzig. So when it comes to German airports, yes, it's called Danzig, but that's a question of their language rather than politics, I would say. And there are still a lot of Germans coming here. So
did they try and repatriate Germans out of here when it became a part of Poland again after the war? Did they try and move the Germans, take them out?
Actually, when it comes to the Germans, some of them decided to leave before the Soviets arrived. But the biggest problem was with people who felt themselves, because you are visiting a very special city. It's called a very special city, where people who lived in the city identified themselves with the city, not so much with Poland or Germany. So they called themselves Danzigers. And they just would say, ich bin von here, which means I'm from here. And that explained everything. They identified themselves with the city, not Poland or Germany. But most of them spoke German. And actually, the biggest problem was with those people who were not on the part of the Nazis, but they lived in a city which was a part of Germany during World War II and before Freistaat Danzig. They spoke German, but they actually didn't want to identify with what Hitlerism was. But since they spoke German, they were persecuted, and some of them wanted to stay here, but after all different kinds of persecutions they got from the the communist authorities, most of them left. So when it comes to Gdansk, the situation is really complicated because you had like Nazis, you had Germans and German troops, and then you had Danzigers. So many of them who really wanted to stay here were made to, for example, work very hard after World War II and collect the debris and clean up the city. So this is really, really complex. When it comes to Gdansk, well, history is never white and black. But when it comes to Gdansk, it's really far from being white and black.
Is Pomerania now a part of Poland?
Yes.
Do
Pomerania.
they call it Pomerania? Pommern?
Pommern is a German name. We call it Pomorze.
Okay.
When it comes to the name of the area, when it comes to an administrative region, province, we call it Pomorskie. And actually the name comes from a Latin name, Pomerania. Yes. So this is actually a Latin name, and it was adopted by Germans and changed to Pommern, and by us and changed to Pomorskie.
Yeah, the language, it's a nuance because no one in Germany calls Germany Germania, which is what the Romans called it. It's Deutschland. So nobody in the West, we don't call Moscow Moskva, like the Russians call it, or in Polish, Moskva.
Yeah.
So it's language and language, names and places different. So it's,
Now, the Jewish population.
This is the entrance to the post office on September 1st, the anniversary of the German attack. They're going to have a ceremony later on this morning.
The walls. And now we are heading for Westerplatte Peninsula. This is the part of today's Gdansk, which is very important for the Polish people, because that's the symbol of courage of the Poles. And on our left-hand side, you can see the Jack Tower and the Market Hall, which is the place where in the past we used to have the St. Dominicans convent. And next to it there was St. Nicholas Church, which belongs to Dominicans today.
Dokąd teraz?
Tutaj?
Nie, w ogóle.
Prawo, na Westerplatte. And on the right hand side you can see the hill. We call it the Bishop's Hill, and you can see the tower on the Bishop's Hill. I'm mentioning Bishop's Hill because that was the place where the German Nazis organized a temporary prison in September 1939. And I also mentioned Victoria Schule, where many Poles were questioned and beaten, and Victoria Schule is on our right hand side. This is the red brick building which today houses the University of Gdansk, the Faculty of Biotechnology. And on the left hand side you can see the historic city center of Gdansk. You can see that from this side the houses look a little bit different than from the long market and long street. And on the left hand side a beautiful panorama of Gdansk with the great crane which we saw yesterday. And this part of Gdansk which still needs reconstruction, this is the Granary Island. This is also the part of Gdansk which was heavily damaged, destroyed practically, because it was destroyed in 90% during World War II, and there is quite a few buildings to be reconstructed, to be rebuilt. So the historic center of Gdansk is all the time to our left. When it comes to Gdansk, we actually should say not the old town, because as you know, most of it was reconstructed. We should rather refer to it as the historic city of Gdansk. Now we are turning right, and if you could have a look on your left-hand side, you can see a red brick structure on the left-hand side with the coat of arms of Gdansk. This is one of the gates which opened to the city, and that was a part of a modern fortification system constructed at the turn of the 16th and 17th centuries, mainly by Dutch people. And now we are heading for the Westerplatte Peninsula, or more precisely for the area of the northern port. Yesterday I mentioned that the historic port of Gdansk was located by the river Motława. This is the river we walked along yesterday. But at the end of the 18th century, as the ships got bigger and the river was too shallow to accommodate them, the port was moved northwards. And today there is the inner port, which we will see from Westerplatte Peninsula across the Port Canal. And the northern port, this is the area we are heading for right now. About 500,000 people but we rarely speak about Gdansk itself. We very often speak about the Tri-City agglomeration, which is actually a combination of three cities. Gdansk is definitely the biggest. Then we've got Sopot and Gdynia. So when it comes to the whole Tri-City agglomeration, its population is about 1 million people. And what is interesting looking at these three cities from a historical perspective, Sopot was a part of Free City of Gdansk, or Danzig. So actually you should remember that when we speak about Free City of Danzig, we actually don't speak only about the city of Gdansk. We speak about we don't speak about just the city of Gdansk. We speak about the city of Gdansk and the area outside it. And the area included Sopot or Sopot, because at that time it was called Sopot, kind of westwards. And eastwards the area stretched for about 70 kilometers. And within the area of Free City of Danzig, we used to have Stutthof, which is the concentration camp that Germans opened first to annihilate Polish people. But then there were people, inmates from other countries, and also in the 1944 there was a big transport of Jewish women who was transported to Stutthof. And right now this is the road to the northern part of Gdansk and to Westerplatte Peninsula. And what you can see in front, this is the suspension bridge, which this is the structure with red ropes. This is the bridge which is located over the dead Vistula River. What you see right now is the dead Vistula River, and the bridge is called after John Paul II, who was the Pope, and what is important, he was of Polish origin.
We're on the Vistula Peninsula. This was a Polish military installation. Right on the edge of the Baltic.
Forster, who was one of Hitler's early disciples. He was a Bavarian. He wasn't from this area, but he started with Hitler in the 1920s and made his way up through the ranks of the Nazi Party. Came up here and really became part of the German movement to take over and Germanize this area. He became Gauleiter of West Prussia and Danzig, as they called it, and was responsible for 87,000 murders. One of them was at Piatnica, which is a Kashubian village. Joanna can say a few words about the Kashubians. It's an ethnic group in this area, where he amassed 12 to 16,000 Poles who wanted to kill priests, intellectuals, teachers, anybody who had authority. And he made a famous speech where he incited all the Germans that the Poles must be eradicated beginning from the cradle. So no one was to be spared. Of course, right after he started that, he said, well, let's get after the Jews too. Anyway, 87,000 murders, just one guy. He was hanged in Warsaw in 1952. So he was Albert Maria Forster was his name. He was a Gauleiter of West Prussia. And I'll let Joanna take it.
All right, so just a few words about the outdoor exhibition, which you can see here. It shows the history of the relations between Poland and Germany in the 1930s, and also the construction of the Polish military transit depot. You can see the logo of the new museum that is being constructed right now in Gdansk. You can see this W and 2 look like two bombs, and this is in the left top corner, and this is the logo of the Museum of World War II. When it comes to this area, as I mentioned, it was granted to Poland by the decision of the League of Nations, but the Danzig authorities have never accepted this decision, and the idea initially was to have a place where we could bring in military devices and ammunition, which we needed because we were a new country after World War I, and we did not feel safe with the Germans in the West and the Soviets in the East. That is why we needed this kind of military support. And when it comes to Westerplatte Peninsula, some of you noticed that the name Westerplatte looks German. It's because this is the original name, and it was coined in the 19th century when this area was under Prussian control, and hence the name is German. But we use the same name in Polish. We did not change the name, so we use it and spell it the way it is with original German spelling. So when the military transit depot was constructed here, they had a kind of ammunition basin. It is what they called it. That was the area where the ships could dock and could be unloaded. They had like 19 ammunition bunkers scattered here in the area. And they also had 5 guardhouses to protect the area in case of an attack. Today we will visit one of such guardhouses, which has survived until the present day. This is guardhouse number 1, and right now we are heading for the guardhouse.